People of Reddit who got shot or stabbed, what's the sensation like? Serious. Bullet wounds are like a weird burning sensation. Stab wounds sometimes you don't even feel. A brawl broke out at a bar one night. Some guy I didn't even know squared up on me and managed to punch me, so I thought, right below the ribcage. Someone pulled out a gun and started firing. I jumped on my crotch rocket and hauled butt out of there. A few minutes later, as I'm flying down the highway, I started feeling woozy. I pulled over and remember I couldn't stand. Then I fell over. Last thing I remember is red and blue lights followed by someone flashing a light in my eyes. Turns out a cop thought I was a drunk rider, and intended to pull me over, but I pulled off to the shoulder before he had the chance. He thought his suspicions were confirmed when I stumbled off the bike and fell on my back. He was in the process of turning me over to cuff me when I guess his hand was on my torso and he noticed it was drenched in blood. Turned out that punch was a stab and I was flying down the highway leaking like a punctured oil pan. Long story short, the initial pain was minimal. The recovery, though? F my life. I got stabbed 3 times with a serrated kitchen steak knife. It hit my spleen, stomach, and heart. It was dark. A little fellow came at me swinging punches. I was still trying to defuse the situation. He didn't want it to come to a fight, so I blocked the punches by slapping them downward. But he had a knife in each hand. I didn't feel the stabs, just felt like light punches to my torso. He turned and ran. I looked down and saw that I was drenched in blood. Walked a few steps and sat on the curb. Turned to a panic-stricken woman next to me and said, "I can't believe how tired I am." Then, asleep I went. TLDR, I didn't really feel the stabs. I was stabbed on a bus in Seoul, Korea as a teenager with a pair of scissors. I put my arms up to protect my face, and that's where they were headed. It went straight in through my elbow. It burnt, like a searing pain. I got stabbed in the gut once. I was a dumb, angry kid fighting with other dumb, angry kids. One of them pulled a knife and just stabbed me. He wasn't really aiming, I don't think, and I honestly didn't feel it really, just saw the blade get pushed into my gut over by the hip. I froze for a second, then punched the guy and took off running. I probably made it about 10 to 15 feet before I collapsed just holding the knife. Luckily, I had some friends there. They just kind of surrounded me while one of them called an ambulance. Last thing I remember was one of my buddies shouting something before I passed out. Woke up a few days later in the hospital and I couldn't bend my abdomen at all. I didn't really feel any pain, just a constant throbbing around the area, but it did hurt like hell whenever I tried to bend over. Doc said there was no major damage done. The blade missed my intestines by about a centimeter. I got shot 6 times in a setup/robbery type situation almost 10 years ago. Went and bought some weed and the guy I bought it from called his buddies that robbed me when I left. I got 1 in the armpit/shoulder, 2 in the chest, 2 in the stomach, 1 in the hip. I didn't necessarily feel pain anywhere but my hip where the bullet lodged into my hip bone and cracked it. I was so amped on adrenaline that I actually got back up and walked a few blocks bleeding everywhere to where the hospital was. Scared the entire lobby of people all to hell, but it didn't really hurt until I woke up from surgery a few days later. The broken ribs from the 2 in the chest were arguably worse than anything else. I got shot in the hip, felt like a burning sensation, and I couldn't put any weight on that leg. The pain at that moment was a weird 6 out of 10. Within minutes, there was an ambulance. Lucky. I'm pretty sure they gave me a shot of morphine in the ambulance because the pain leveled out to about a 4 until they wheeled me into the operating room. When you get hit with a shotgun loaded with birdshot at my back on accident, had some in bed and had to be dug out. It doesn't feel at certain points, but more like getting hit with a low-speed car all over. I passed out from shock, and when I woke up, I wasn't in pain anymore because they were already dug out and I was on pain meds till they finished healing. Still have faint scars on my back that aren't very visible, but you can feel the texture change. I'm reading this thread looking for answers. I was never stabbed, but a close friend of mine was stabbed in the chest when he was 16. I wasn't there. From the guys that were there, they told me he was crying because he didn't want to die. After a few minutes, he went limp, and that was it. We weren't good kids, but he never deserved that. I think about it all the time. That moment changed my life for the better. I had a bullet migrate out my scalp. No idea how it got there. Only felt it when it turned into a huge knot with a pimple in the middle. My ex popped it like a pimple, and a bullet came out. It was an orgasmic sensation coming out. Still can't figure out how it got there. Must have been in there for years. Got stabbed by my dad once when he was drunk and angry about something. Can't remember what because unfortunately he was drunk and angry a lot. I saw it coming and was terrified the whole time, so I'm not sure if that amplified or lessened the pain. I was stabbed in the shoulder and it wasn't particularly deep, but it felt like being stuck with a needle, only wider, if that makes sense. It wasn't a particularly pleasant experience, and it's certainly not one I'd like to repeat. Not stabbed by a human, but a building. I was 11 and in the crappy town of Hastings, Ontario. Last game of the hockey tournament and 3 days before my birthday. I'm running outside the arena and running up and down the sides of narrow ramps where I misjudged a step. I don't know why this was thought of as a good idea, but there were rebar-like poles with sharp threads sticking horizontally from the building, right at the perfect height above my knee. At first it felt numb, then I rubbed it and it felt weird. I started crying instinctively and went to Dad. He carried me to the van and set me on the seat. I was pretty fat as a kid, so I luckily had extra fat because when he cut open my pants and saw my gash, oh boy, it was an inch wide and 5 centimeters deep. No pain. 26-minute drive to the hospital, no pain. When the needle to freeze my wound went in, though, yikes. Oh, and they didn't freeze great, so I felt some stitches. I got stabbed by myself on accident, ripped open an artery and severed a tendon, so I'm not over-exaggerating when I say stabbed. The only thing I really felt was a cold sensation around the area. I didn't feel any actual pain until I was getting stitches because the doctor had to go pretty deep. Other than that, it really wasn't that bad. It was more scary than anything else. I was shot with a .300 Magnum while bear hunting a month ago. I got hit in the right thigh. Femur fracture, which is already known to be one of the most painful things as is. It feels odd. Actually, I didn't know what had happened at first. 1 second I was standing there, another I was on the ground unable to move. It was really confusing. The best way I can describe it is like it's warm, like a localized warm shower for a few moments. The shock set in pretty quick. I couldn't really feel the pain for about a minute and a half. That's when the other hunters started having to reach in and put pressure on the veins and arteries so I wouldn't bleed out. That hurt like hell. It's a very difficult sensation to describe, but it was a stabbing pain all over the wound, but the rest of me went numb because of hemorrhagic shock. I could feel my muscles shutting down and the blood being pulled. I went very lightheaded and they had to keep me from passing out. Your fingers start to tighten up and you can't move. It's a very scary feeling. Then they put the tourniquet on. Oh God, if I never felt one of those again, it will be too soon. That was the most painful thing I have ever experienced. It has to go right above the wound and shut off blood flow so you don't keep losing blood. That made everything worse, and though I knew I needed one, it was so painful I screamed bloody murder when the EMTs put it on. Essentially, your body shuts down everything to try and save itself, but the side effect is that you can only feel the excruciating pain of the massive hole in your leg. As much as I knew passing out would make it 10 times worse, I really, really wanted to. Does a hockey skate count? More of a slicing and dicing than the old in and out, but still. Hockey game. I was around 13 to 14, so right around that age where on the ice some kids have hit puberty and are pretty damn near 6 foot, and other kids who haven't and are in the 5 foot range. I was a scrappy kid on the ice, but wasn't physically all that big, just your average young teen. Open ice, this tall, awkward player on the other team was lining me up in the trolley tracks. He was the kind of player whom wasn't entirely solid on his new height. He was lanky and did not have great balance. Anyways, he lines me up to hit me and I just drop my shoulder and take it. We both go down in a pretty solid hit, legs all tangled up in just a goofy few seconds while we get ourselves together. He got up first, stepped over me, and planted his skate on the inside of my thigh and pushed off, none the wiser. I didn't feel much, head was still ringing from the hit. Got up and skated around for another 15 seconds, getting back into play. Felt what could best be described as loose hanging meat. But it was still somewhat held together due to my hockey gear. I looked down and realized my white hockey socks were just covered in blood, which is the only reason I realized what happened. Before this, the pain was just a light stinging. I skated to the bench, yelled, "Oh crap!" in a terrified way. The pitch and squeak of my voice clued the coaches in that something wasn't right. So they get me to the locker room, start taking my gear off to see how bad it was. A mother in the stands was a nurse, so she rushed into the locker room. Takes a good look and turns green, which wasn't a good sign in hindsight. My inner thigh was just sliced wide open and hanging out. Pain kicked in. Was not a clean cut due to the nature, so the pain was all over the place as the cut was pretty jagged. The cut itself, when it happened, wasn't too bad, but the aftermath was the worst after I realized I could see the meat inside my leg. Got stitched up fine, came real close to the femoral artery, which would have probably taken things to more dire manners. Got stabbed in the leg once. It came out of nowhere and I didn't realize till I looked down and saw the blade sticking out of my leg, and I promptly freaked out. The pain hit me as soon as I saw the knife in my leg, and recovery hurt like hell as well. Got stabbed stopping a fight. I was drunk, so didn't really feel it. Almost went home, but instead drove myself to the hospital where they performed emergency surgery. Had to have my spleen removed, some of my small intestines. I was in a coma in the ICU for 2 weeks. The doctors said I came within an eyelash of dying. So yeah, try not to get stabbed. The recovery, though, was painful as hell. I suppose this counts as stabbing. Screw through the foot. Dad was finishing the basement. Don't remember what he was doing, but it involved long wood screws. I was 10 or 11 years old and at his heels, excitedly shadowing him. At some point, I tripped over my dad's drill and caught myself with my hands a mere inch or two from breaking my nose on the stairs. That was close, I laughed. My mom, who was also there, started yelling, "Don't move!" Looked back to see the tip of the screw poking through the top of my right foot. I didn't feel it, but seeing it, geez. And yes, my dad took it out of my foot by unscrewing it. Probably shouldn't have taken it out, but this is the same dad who leaned my bloody head over the sink and rinsed out the wounds with the sprayer after I hit the road face first flying off my bike. You'll be fine. TLDR, screw attempted to drop me, didn't feel it. Also, don't remove the object you're impaled with. I accidentally stabbed myself in the eye when I was young. It didn't hurt at all, actually. It happened so quickly that I didn't even know what I did at first. 1 second I could see perfectly fine, the next I couldn't open my eye. When I tried to open my eye, my hands, I got a little lightheaded, so I decided to take a nap. At that point, my brother got our dad. He tried to look at my eye, but it wouldn't open. He assumed an eyelash or some dirt got in at first, but then realized it was something more serious, so he took my brother and I to the clinic. There, I had to wait over 2 hours to be seen. When I finally was seen, they just said I should go to the hospital. I was then rushed to the hospital and prepped for surgery. Today, my vision in that eye is blurry. It's like looking through an unfocused lens or trying to watch something in like 20p instead of 720p. I can see mostly fine around a room, but small details are gone. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.